The well was dry, except for her voice. He heard it the night the sky forgot how to make clouds. Cracked earth clicked beneath his boots as he crossed the yard, a lantern coughing light in jittery circles. The rope over the well's beam moaned in the windless dark like something old waking up. He wasn't a man for ghosts. Grief had taken even that luxury. But when he leaned over the stone lip, heat rising from the hollow like breath from a sleeping animal, he heard the whisper again, her whisper, rushing up from the throat of the earth. Eli. He froze. Hannah had been gone 2 summers now. She'd left him a house that felt too quiet, a field that kept forgetting to green, and a silence he had learned to wear like a coat that no longer fit. He stared into the black circle as if it could stare back. He smelled dust and old iron. He willed reason into his bones, told himself it was wind, echo, memory. Then something tapped the stones far below, a quick, nervous sound, like knuckles on a table at supper time. Tap, tap, tap. He lowered the lantern. Light pooled down the shaft and died. What it revealed was not water. It was a note jarred in glass, an old canning jar tied to the end of the rope, suspended halfway down. Beneath it, the rest of the well yawned in sun-baked emptiness. His hands moved before sense did. He turned the crank, rope rasping, wheel spitting dust, and brought the jar into the light. Inside, dry as a hymn book, lay a folded paper with his name on it in her handwriting. Nothing else existed for a moment. Not the famished soil, not the warning letters from the bank, not the sleep he kept breaking with lists he couldn't finish. Only that curve of ink he knew better than his own. He opened the lid with the reverence of a church door. Eli, the first line began. If you're holding this, the sky hasn't loved us for a while. He swallowed the rest with his eyes, not his mouth. Too thirsty for that. She had written about the day the wind changed, the way swallows circled without committing to a direction. She told him where in the south field. The ground still remembered the creek. She told him how deep to dig, and where the old cedar roots would argue with his shovel. She told him to be patient with the stubborn things, soil, mules, men. At the bottom, in smaller letters that pressed harder into the page, she wrote, "There will be more notes. Don't be afraid of the well. It's only a doorway. H." A second sound reached him. Soft, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. He looked back down. Another jar nudged the stone, as if a polite guest had arrived and didn't wish to intrude. Eli Walker had never left this county, and this county had never once left him alone. He farmed what his father farmed and what his father's father farmed before that, a patchwork of corn and sorghum stitched to pasture, by fences more memory than cedar. Grief has a way of rearranging furniture you could swear you never moved. After Hannah's funeral, he spent a week sitting in joints of light, on the back steps at dawn, on the truck bed at noon, on the kitchen chair that faced the empty one. Work kept him standing. Drought taught him to hover over the ground like a man trying not to wake a sleeping ache. Neighbors said the rain would come. They always said that. They clucked their tongues, set casseroles down like apologies, and tucked bank flyers beneath the salt. Banks are patient until they aren't. The second notice came with a name and a date. The name belonged to a man who wanted Eli's land the way developers want what they can't understand. The date was 30 days away, and 30 looked like a cliff when your hands were full of seed and fear. He kept lists on butcher paper taped crooked to the fridge. Diesel, fence staples, grease, prayers. He crossed off what money could buy and underlined what it couldn't. The dog, a blunt old healer named Lark, slept under the bed since Hannah's last hospital night, and only came out for bacon or thunder. The house grew careful, as if every door remembered a slammed argument and didn't want another. Even the clock learned to tick softly, as if noise were a kind of theft. If you're watching this now, you know the feeling, how the world narrows to numbers, acres, inches, days. Before we go further, if this story finds you somewhere between what you've lost and what you're afraid to lose, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your weather. Tell me the last time the sky surprised you. This channel is a long porch and there's room for you on it. Back to Eli. He didn't believe in fate, but he believed in lamp oil, rope, and the weight of things you can hold. He believed in the way Hannah left grocery lists that ended with, "Remember the stars." He believed in work that burned and work that blessed. And now, with the first jar's note in his pocket like a talisman he was afraid to touch too often, he believed in paper. The second jar rose from the well with a shy clink as if embarrassed by its own persistence. The note inside bore a smudge of flour, as though she had set it down mid-bread. "Don't dig yet," it said. Go to the barn loft. Behind the third rib of pine from the east window there's a tin. Take what you need. Leave what you can. When you're ready, come back to the well. He went because not going felt like betrayal. The loft smelled of hay, mouse, and summers that had behaved themselves. Dust floated like tired confetti in a slit of sun. He counted ribs of pine with a carpenter's stubbornness and found the wobble that gives away a secret. Behind the plank sat a biscuit tin painted with cherries gone to rust. Inside lay heirloom seed packets, a carpenter's pencil worn to a thumb's length, a wedding photo, a clipped recipe for blackberry pie, and 3 $20 bills flattened into obedience by time. He slid the photo from its onion skin sleeve. They were foolishly young, both of them, and grateful in the way you only recognize afterward. Her ribbon was blue that day, a defiant stripe of sky against the black and white. He pressed the picture to his chest until the ache settled into usefulness and tucked it back like a seed that preferred the dark. He took the pencil and the seeds. He left the money. He didn't need paper to know what it cost Hannah to write these notes, planning a future from the far side of pain. On the ladder down he miscounted and dropped the last rung, landing harder than dignity prefers. He laughed, a cracked sound, and realized it had been months since he'd heard himself make it. Lark looked up from a square of sun and thumped his tail once, as if approving a noise he'd missed too. Outside, wind bullied dust into small rehearsals for storms that never showed. Eli walked the fence line before dusk, as was his religion. He checked the staples that held cedar to wire and wire to memory. He picked a grass stem and chewed it until it surrendered its ghost of sweetness. In the distance, the neighbors' center pivots turned like indecisive clocks, casting gleams across fields that had already given up. Every so often, a dust devil tried a dance that never got invited to rain. He tipped his hat to the lone cedar in the south field as if it were an elder sitting in judgment and in mercy at the same time. At the kitchen table, he set the biscuit tin down and brewed coffee that tasted faintly of iron. He wrote a new list. Oil the windmill, tighten gate chain, breathe. He added a reckless one. Sleep. He wrote to Hannah, too. Sentences he didn't lower into the well. Your tomatoes would hate this year. I found your thimble in the sugar can. The dog still searches your side when it storms. The house accepted each scrap like a museum collecting ordinary holiness. When he returned to the well, the air felt cooler though the heat hadn't broken. The rope waited. He set the lantern on the stone rim and watched a moth audition for immortality. Somewhere a coyote filed his loneliness against the hills. He turned the crank. The third jar winked a tiny circle of light. Eastfield, the note said. Walk its length in the morning and count your steps out loud. Your voice needs to hear you. He did as instructed at first light, talking to Earth like a man rehearsing for conversation. He reached the fence with a number he didn't memorize because the point had been practice, not proof. The banksman called and left a message he must have practiced for other people in other kitchens. It included the words amicable solution and timeline. Eli stood in silence until the machine swallowed its own voice. He deleted nothing. Deleting felt like pretending a thing hadn't been said, and he was done with pretending. He drove into town because empty cupboards tell the truth. The clerk at the feed store offered a small discount and a look that was almost apology. Past the grain bins, a boy flew a kite stitched from trash bags. It strained against a sky that didn't deserve the compliment. On Main Street, church signs strove for cheer and almost made it. The coffee at the diner tasted of metal. He ordered it anyway and left a tip large enough to embarrass him. The waitress squeezed his shoulder the way people do when they want to fix what can't be fixed, and decide that touch is the next best tool. Back home, afternoon threw its dull blanket over the fields. He replaced a cracked belt on the pump using a strip of his father's old Sunday pants, just as the first note had taught. He cursed, then thanked, and both felt like prayers wearing different hats. Lark followed him to the porch and laid his chin on Eli's boot, a quiet pledge of allegiance. The sun slid down the barns like a coin that had forgotten its value. Night returned with its careful stars. The fourth jar rose with instructions drawn like a teacher's chalk. Measure the sun with your thumb at mid-morning. Pace from the fence line to the bald patch. Draw a triangle. Trust the ruler. Be patient with stubborn things, she wrote. Soil, mules, men. He copied the sentence on butcher paper and taped it next to the fridge list. It belonged beside diesel and staples. It belonged beside prayers. Before sleep, he opened the biscuit tin and touched the carpenter's pencil. He sharpened it with his pocket knife, rolling cedar shavings between finger and thumb until the kitchen smelled faintly like a schoolroom. Then he wrote one more list. Things to keep, things to let go. Under keep, he wrote the creek's memory, the dog's tail, the blue ribbon, the well. Under let go, he wrote almost nothing, then added the word shame and underlined it until the paper threatened to give. He slept hard for 3 hours and woke to the idea of weather turning. He stepped outside into a wind that had misplaced its heat. The stars seemed closer, as if the night had exhaled. He went to the well and didn't ask for a jar. He set his hand on the rope the way you set a hand on a shoulder you trust. "I'm here," he said, and the stones said nothing back, which felt like permission enough to go on. It kept happening. Each night the rope lowered itself like a patient arm. Each night a jar kissed stone and waited, as if the well had become a post office for the past. Notes arrived in her voice. Mend the pump belt with a strip from his father's Sunday pants. Find the map she'd hidden in the hymn book to trace the creek the county redirected in '83. Call in a favor from a man he hadn't spoken to in years. By the fourth note she had him measuring sun with his thumb, pacing distances from the fence line, drawing triangles in dust like a schoolboy relearning trust. "Dig here," she wrote. 3 feet first. Then stop. Wait for dawn. The earth loosens with light. He did what the page asked because pages had never lied to him. On the 7th night the note was different. Short, urgent, corners pressed hard. "A man will come," it read. "He wants what is buried because he heard us argue about it once." Eli remembered. A summer thunderhead stumbling toward them, then thinking better of it. Hannah insisting they mark the creek's old course before the county paved over its memory. Eli claiming there wasn't time when fences were down and cows were eyeing the neighbor's alfalfa. They laughed by evening. The man came next afternoon. Clean hat, brochure smile. He talked about liquidity, like something you could pump and store in a portfolio. He offered to buy, then lease, then partner. He worried about wells, regulations, liabilities. As his hand drifted toward the rope like a fly to sugar, Eli stepped between him and the mouth of the well with a slowness louder than a shout. "County says that hole's a hazard," the man said. "County didn't marry her," Eli answered. He felt the old bones of the farm a line behind his spine. Some lines are fences, some are lifelines. He'd found the latter. That night there was no jar. The well's mouth was a blank eye reflecting stars. Eli slept on the kitchen floor with the door locked and the lantern dark, a broom across the sill as if straw could litigate. Before dawn he dreamed of rain, woke to silence, and nearly believed the well had given up. Then a soft tap traveled the stone throat, hesitant like a guest who didn't want to wake the house. He lifted the lantern and cranked. Glass scraped rock. The jar rose. Inside, the note was ringed with damp, letters wavering, but legible. "You don't need me for the next part," she had written, "but I want to be there anyway, Southfield, Cedar Roots." He touched the page the way you touch a forehead checking for fever. It felt the exact temperature of memory. Days became ritual. Morning, chores, lists, engines held together with wire and promise. Afternoon, heat that made the farm sound like a sleeping animal. Dusk, the walk to the well. Night, the jar, the handwriting, the ache that was both wound and medicine. He learned the creak of every pulley tooth, the rasp of rope on the beam, the note glass made when it kissed stone. Sometimes the notes carried small objects with their words. Bread twist ties, a paper clip, a sliver of cedar, a rusty washer, as if Hannah were building a shrine to ordinary fixes. "Keep these," one line said. "You'll know when." He pocketed each token like a coin minted by a private country. On his worst days he'd take one out and hold it to remind himself that tools can be tenderness-wearing work clothes. Eli tested the well in the daylight once, lowering an empty bucket, listening for water he knew wasn't there. The bucket thudded against dry bricks. Still, when night fell, the air above the shaft cooled as if something below was storing winter. He couldn't court logic without betraying wonder, and he had chosen wonder because it kept showing up with written directions. Word spread, as it does in counties stitched from gravel roads and Sunday services. Trucks slowed past his place, drivers pretending to check fence lines. Someone said a cache of prohibition liquor lay down there, carbonating the dark. Another swore the well was a bootleg radio receiving broadcasts from the other side. Eli ignored them. He had jars to read and ground to measure. On the 10th night, the jar carried a map in Hannah's careful hand. The south field crisscrossed with dotted lines, arrows marking slope, a tiny X at the bald spot where nothing ever grew right. "The creek remembers," she wrote. find where it used to lay its head. She drew a cedar with reaching roots and annotated the page with a recipe's rhythm. Dig, rest, listen. By then, the bank's second notice had grown teeth. Dates don't negotiate unless you give them rain. Eli set the paper under a rooster magnet and stood between the house and the well. The stars had that fevered clarity drought gives, a sky apologizing for withholding water by oversharing light. "I'm listening," he told the hole. It said nothing, which still counted as an answer. On the 11th night, a storm teased the horizon, flashing without voice. The jar clinked twice, a stutter, anxious. Inside, 3 heavier words waited. "Do not delay." He did not. He sharpened his shovel by lantern, packed a canteen half-filled from the last rain barrel, and laid his hands on the cedar as you greet an elder. The bark felt warm, as if the tree kept a private memory of fire. By first light he would dig. For now he stood over the cistern of silence, one more jar cooling in his hands, and realized the strangest part wasn't that notes rose where water should have been. The strangest part was how the instructions, however uncanny, kept making him more himself, more farmer than mourner, more husband than relic. The well was not a mouth for the dead. It was a door reminding the living to step through. He noticed other changes too. His hands stopped shaking when he greased the tractor, and the dog, who had slept under the bed since the funeral, began following him to the porch again. He started humming scraps of hymns without remembering the verses. He checked fence staples with a patience he used to save for love. Even coffee tasted like something earned. When he caught his face in the kitchen window at night, the man staring back looked less haunted, more weathered, and weathered, he decided, was a kind of praise. He tied his boots slower, as if time finally listened. Again, Eli started at first light. The south field was a hard-lipped smile of earth. He walked where her map said, 3 posts east of the gate, 5 paces past the cedar's shadow, 5 back because doubt overshoots. The shovel met refusal, then bone, then a sigh like something tired of waiting. Cedar roots caught his blade exactly as she'd promised. "I know you were here first," he told them, and worked around the knots with grief-taught patience. Stone answered, flat, wide, unwilling. He cleared edges with his hands until his nails wore small moons of dirt. He levered the slab. It moved with a groan old enough to remember his grandfather. Cold mineral air rose, the inside of a storm. Underneath lay a brick-lined cistern, a secret cup the creek once filled before the county rerouted it. He laughed without sound and dipped a bucket. The water tasted like rain not yet introduced to sky. He poured a circle where the map's X marked the bald patch, and gave a blessing to the cedar with the leftover. A truck idled by the fence. The man from yesterday stepped down, 2 silhouettes in expensive sunglasses behind him. No gun, just paperwork. "Morning," he said. "County's offering incentives if folks will cooperate." He nodded toward the hole. "You strike oil, old-timer?" "Better," Eli said. "Memory." The smile tightened. "Let me help with that well. Hazard, like I said." His hand drifted toward the rope. "You touch it," Eli said, "and you'll learn what hazard feels like." He wasn't young or large, but grief had built a house in him and filled it with a strength that needed no witnesses. Eli flicked 2 cold drops from his bucket onto the man's boots. "Hear that?" "Hear what?" "Thirst." A county truck rolled up like punctuation. Deputy Nora Booker climbed out. 2 farms over, 2 grades below Hannah, and nobody's fool. She read the scene the way a farmer reads sky. Hole, rope, men, posture. "This land in dispute?" she asked. "Offering assistance," the man said. "Public safety." "Public safety often looks like trespass when I'm the badge," Nora replied. "Offer it from the county road." The men withdrew, their tailpipe writing a short, smoky affidavit across the ditch. "Whatever you're doing," Nora said to Eli, "do it fast. The bank boys carry clocks." "I've got one," he said, tapping the cedar. "It keeps time with roots." He built a windlass over the cistern from plans Hannah had sketched on the back of a hymn, then laid drip lines like veins across the south field. He rationed each drop as if it carried a secret price. Sandbags became a low berm to shepherd runoff toward the oldest furrows. He worked until his palms were a pair of arguments he kept winning only by continuing. The well resumed its postal duties. Jars rose with fewer words, but each one landed like a hand on his shoulder. "Pick the 3rd jar when you need courage," an earlier note had said. Inside, he'd found the corner of a dress pattern and the smell of her. Another, "Check the northern fence after wind." He did. He found the weak post and braced it with boards he'd kept 15 years for no reason until now. At dusk, the sky bruised purple. Crickets attempted a chorus, failed, and tried again. Eli traced the dotted lines on the map with his boot and planted test rows along the faint swale that betrayed the creek's old path. Seed settled into the brief cool his bucketed water provided. He tamped the soil with the flat of his palm, the way you settle a restless child. Another truck arrived. Same man. No smile. He stayed behind the fence like a preacher who finally read the verse that condemned him. "You bought a season," he said. "Maybe 2. My offer won't get friendlier." "Neither will the land," Eli replied, not unkindly. Speaking as the dirt would speak felt less like defiance and more like honesty in a language money rarely studies. "You're not the only one who reads maps," the man said. "I remember that creek because paperwork says I must. Paper outlasts men." "Not when it gets wet," Eli said, and lifted the bucket just high enough to make the point. The man left one card and a small threat with the same hand. Dust closed the paragraph his tires had written. Sleep came hard and clean. In his dream, Hannah leaned against the cedar, pointing to where the creek once braided into shallow channels, little mirrors catching sun. "Quit being clever," she said. "Be faithful." He woke smiling, brewed coffee, and walked the lines before dawn. A pinhole leak fizzed on the 3rd drip tape, ruinous if the field were larger. He fixed it with one of Hannah's twist ties and laughed at the holiness of such a small salvation. By mid-morning he'd raised a scarecrow in his old jacket. Not to frighten birds, he liked their gossip, but to remind himself a man still lived to fill that shape. The discovery changed the math but not the date. The bank's letter sat under the rooster magnet like an impatient uncle. He called, asked for time, received a script and hung up before it could explain how empathy works when multiplied by interest. He would have to grow himself a check. He cut narrow trenches to steer any stray rain. He mulched with shredded catalogs that had promised easy lives to people who did not smell of diesel. He wrote notes and left them on the well's lip. Planted late, but steady. Fence, held in north wind. "I miss your blue ribbon." He didn't lower them. Some letters are for night air and nobody else. By week's end, the bald patch accepted green like a scar accepting tenderness. Cautiously, then with relief, he walked the rows at dusk, counting leaves, breath, chances. At the cedar, he pressed his palm to bark and felt sap moving with purpose. "Thank you," he said into the wood, which is the only church many farmers ever truly attend. He noticed changes, his hands steadier when greasing the tractor, the dog shadowing him to the porch again, hymns humming out without verses, coffee tasting earned instead of borrowed. When his reflection found him in the window at night, the man staring back looked less haunted, more weathered, and weathered he decided was praise spelled by wind and time. Sometimes. What he found under the stone was no cure for grief. It was a companion, a task that cupped the ache so it wouldn't spill. The cistern had waded through drought, arguments, bad engineering, and worse luck. It asked one thing: use me until the sky remembers. He could do that. Rain arrived as forgiveness often does. Slow, then all at once. A green smell lifted before the first drop found his wrist. The second tapped his hat. The third made a dark coin on the step. He moved as if quickness might startle the sky. He cranked the well out of habit and found only a blue ribbon. Neighbors stepped onto porches to audition joy. Some cheered, some wept. Some simply turned their faces upward like sunflowers reversing time. Deputy Nora pulled onto the shoulder and rolled down her window to hear corn pronouncing its name again. The cedar shook itself like a dog leaving a river. Eli stood in the south field and felt water find every seam grief had left in him. Work multiplied. He walked the drip lines, now wet with their own irrelevance, and restaked runs. He opened little gates so rain could freeload. Soil drank until it shone. Seeds he'd tucked into the faint swale woke with shivers only beggars of fields can see. He slept in slices and woke to study the sky's many versions of dark. The well offered no jar that night or the next. The silence didn't scare him. He had her ribbon and the work she'd assigned from a distance faith had made practical. He wrote his own note and left it on the stone lip. Sky remembered. The paper soaked the message and became proof in a language trees and fields share. Then came the last visit that mattered. The man returned with an umbrella like a baton. He studied the softening field. "You can save a season," he said. "I can end your worry today." Eli met him at the fence. "You can end your worry," he said. "I'm learning to live with mine. You're sentimental about dirt. I'm accurate about it. There's liability with that old well. If a delivery man slips, He let the sentence dangle like bait. Eli let silence be the hook. "If I sell," he said at last, "what happens to the creek that doesn't know it's gone?" "The creek is a line on a map," the man answered. "It goes where easements say. And memory? Memory is for stories." "Then hear one," Eli said. He told him about the lid and the bricks and the water holding its breath, about cedar roots like a choir, about a woman who wrote notes from inside whatever hides behind mercy. He didn't ask the man to believe him. He simply spoke as if the field translated. The umbrella dipped, a small acknowledgement that something had been understood if not accepted. "My offer expires at month's end," the man said. "Rain extended mine. Take it up with weather." The man left, not defeated, not victorious, merely wet. He returned to ledgers where numbers waited to do what they always do. Eli returned to Rose and asked them for something math rarely sees. Forgiveness when you've done your best and it still isn't enough. The storm broke into days, then into a bright, embarrassed calm. Sun warmed the world like an apology. Green moved from rumor to fact. Ears filled, tassels combed the air, and wind turned the corn to a murmuring congregation. He took out the carpenter's pencil and began a ledger on butcher paper. Seed, fuel, repairs, jars of guidance he could not price. He circled the bank's number and practiced the sentence a man practices when he hopes to keep his land. "I can pay." The last test arrived at harvest's edge. A dry lightning stack glowed on the horizon, throwing silent flash after flash. Forecasts promised bluster without rain. He walked the rows with a sprayer on his back, wetting the perimeter to discourage the kind of fire that likes to begin as a rumor. Heat shouldered him even after sunset. Halfway down the long row, he smelled smoke where there shouldn't be any. At the far fence, 2 teenagers had chosen the hay bales for a backdrop. One flicked a cigarette and missed embarrassment by several yards. The ember nested in last year's stubble and woke up mean. Flame scribbled toward the straw windbreak he'd laid to save the soil. He ran. He didn't shout first. Shouting wastes air you need for running. He hit the edge of flame with his jacket, then his hat, then a shovel, beating and scooping and swearing with the creativity fear gives the honest. The kids froze like deer. "Water!" he barked, and one sprinted for a hose while the other stomped like a man arguing with a snake. The fire shrugged off their early efforts and reached greedily for the windbreak. Eli cut it off with a trench carved in 20 heaving breaths, then flooded the gap with water from the cistern. The fire paused, curled into itself, and fell silent. The boy returned with a hose that coughed, then found its voice. Together they bullied the last tongues into steam. "Sorry, sir," the girl said, voice a handful. "We didn't think." "Thinking's heavy," he said. "Carry some next time." He made them coil hose and rake edges until apology became muscle. They promised to return with their fathers to mend the fence. He believed them. He'd seen their faces when Flame almost wrote a letter to everyone they loved. He walked to the well in the new quiet. No jar waited. He didn't expect one. He set his burnt hat on the stones and let the night breeze cool his scalp. "We passed the test," he said, and felt foolish, then free not to. Crickets took up the thought and set it back to him until it sounded true. Harvest came honest. Not spectacular, but enough. He paid what he could and faced the bank with boots cleaned but not polished. Papers changed weight in his hands. Outside, sun warmed the receipt. He bought a blue ribbon on way home. That evening the town held a supper under borrowed lights. Pies crowded tables. Eli set a jar in the center with the ribbon tied around its neck and penciled a label. Notes. Later, under a sky that learned its ethics, he walked to the well and lowered the empty jar once, then pulled it up. The rope creaked. The jar rose empty and perfect. He set it beside his coffee and listened to the land speak root by root, drop by drop. He understood. Her voice had never been trapped in stone or paper. It was woven into stubborn things. Soil, cedar, creek, him. He tipped the jar toward the field like a toast and then went inside. Across the next weeks, Green returned with a humility that made it beautiful. Shoots became rows. Rows became a promise, and promise, for the first time in a long while, began to feel like something he could plant, without fearing to count it too soon. The bank still called. He answered. He asked for time. Time arrived disguised as weather. The man with the smile returned once more. He leaned on the fence and did not smile. "You bought yourself a season," he said. Eli nodded. "A season's a kind of forever if you know how to use it." The man looked at the south field, at the smart glitter of irrigation, at the old cedar making shade like a blessing. He adjusted his hat. "You're not the only one who reads maps." he said, and left it at that. Eli didn't read the threat in the statement. He read the admission. The land had a memory longer than any ledger. It remembered creeks and footpaths and wedding days and the way laughter sounds when it's trying not to wake a sleeping baby. It remembered Hannah and her blue ribbon and him at her side, young enough to be foolish and lucky enough to think that was wisdom. The note stopped. He went to the well anyway, every night for a while, touching the rope like a handshake. Sometimes he lowered an empty jar and pulled it back up, just to prove the world still worked both ways. He began to write his own notes, short ones, folded small, and set them on the well's edge. Planted late but strong, fence held through the north wind. I wore the shirt you hated because it's the only one that still fits what's left of me. He didn't lower them. He let the night read them. Harvest came honest. Not spectacular, not a miracle, just enough. Enough to pay what could be paid and argue fairly for what couldn't. Enough to make a meal of more than debt. Deputy Nora brought pies to the first community supper after rain. Neighbors brought apologies disguised as congratulations. Eli brought seed for next year, and a blue ribbon tied around the jar he set in the center of the table. He never solved the well, not in a way he could explain to anyone who hadn't heard a dead woman whisper their name with a living kind of love. He didn't need to solve it. Some doors stay doors because they open to something that doesn't want to be a hallway. On a cool evening in late fall, he walked to the well with a cup of coffee and a note. He had written it carefully, in the carpenter's pencil from the tin. "If you're holding this," it began, "it means the sky remembered us." He set it beside the rope, touched the knot, and looked up. Stars scattered themselves like grain. The field shushed in a wind that had finally learned to be kind. He pictured Hannah reading, nodding, smiling at his crooked lines, and he smiled back. The well was quiet. But the land spoke, root by root, drop by drop, seed by seed, and for the first time since she left, Eli understood that her voice had not been trapped in stone or paper. It had always been woven into the stubborn things.